The following program is brought to you free of charge by the sponsorship of Novus Ordo Watch. See for yourself that the Church of the Second Vatican Council is not in fact the Catholic Church of the ages. Go to novusordowatch.org.
Hello and welcome to Pastoralia on the Restoration Radio Network. This show seeks to ask questions of our clergy about things that we would like to ask them, but we never quite get around to. Our guest today is Father Stephen McKenna, who was with us for the Zero show for Pastoralia at the end of Season 2. Father, we really appreciate the Zero show you did, and welcome to Season 3.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, it's good to be here.
Pastoralia is underwritten by True Restoration with articles, books, and videos available at truerestoration.org. And while a portion of the operating costs of the radio network are underwritten by True Restoration, our particular show and our network is truly listener supported. We have annual radio subscriptions for the subscriber of every level available by clicking the donate button at truerestoration.org. Restoration radio programs, including this one, are available on blogtalkradio.com/restoration radio, at our new website, restorationradionetwork.com, and are syndicated on iTunes and Stitcher. You can follow the work of True Restoration on all social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, Flickr, LinkedIn, and Pinterest, by following us using the social buttons, also on truerestoration.org. Okay, commercial over, Father. We get to the beginning of our show, Pastoralia, and I thought that you picked a really good way to start this show in this season by talking about the treatment of priests, in particular etiquette that we should use towards our clerics. And I suppose most Catholics have a pretty good sense of this. I don't want to give people the impression that we think everybody needs to start from ground zero, but I think often both you and I have observed things that are not quite right. And so it makes sense for us to just start at the beginning and talk about how to properly treat our priests.
Yeah, I think it's more for most people, I think it's more a fine tuning, I guess, really in that regard.
So I guess let's start with, how should people view their priests? I mean, obviously you're an alter Christus. You have this incredible mark on your soul. You're able to bring down God at your command. How do we contextualize that into everyday interaction with you?
Oh, it's I think it's always finding that middle ground in between two extremes. You have the one side where certainly the influence of especially the modern church and modern society, where it's Father's just another Joe, that just kind of, we treat him like any other guy and go from there. And then the other side of it is the extreme to the other end, where it's, like treating like almost like, like we should bow down at every footstep he takes. Not that happens all that often, but it's kind of like, it's in between that. It is the recognition of the office in itself, and the importance of that office, and but at the same time, realizing that you still can talk to a priest in a normal conversation, and still and talk to him like a normal human being within the realm of in a certain realm of respect. Anyways, finding that happy ground and realizing, above all that he's, I guess the best thing is, like that more of the proper treatment and expectations of attitude from him as well, that, he's a gentleman before all else. I think that is kind of like the baseline for dealing with clergy in that regard. So that's the way I
Indeed.
kind of look at it. Yeah.
Well, let's start with just greetings in public or in private. One habit I picked up, and as I was prepping for the show, I was trying to remember exactly, where I picked it up from. But like so many habits, sometimes we don't exactly remember the etymology. But probably around when I was 13, 14, 15, I started always kissing the hand of a priest when it was offered to me, and also not presuming to move my hand towards a priest without him extending it first. Can you address? I mean, obviously that's my particular thing. Sometimes priests are a little surprised by it when I do it, but I try not to, make you lunge forward. I think the times when we've been together, I haven't pulled you into me like a wrestling move. It's just been I try to make it inobtrusive, but sometimes I know it can surprise clergy, and it's not something that you expect. Correct?
Right, and I think it's more, perhaps more an American treatment or American custom in that way, that the kissing of the hand has kind of gone more by the wayside here in the United States, and is not really expected here in the United States. That's not to say it's not a nice tradition, and oftentimes I noticed it particularly with different people of like Spanish origin, especially the Mexicans and things like that they oftentimes follow that, and it is a nice sign of respect. I mean, when you think of it, it is like you said at the very beginning. His hands are the ones which are used in bringing down in consecrating the body and blood of our Lord during the sacrifice of the Mass. I mean, there's they hold God Himself in that way, and it's His hands that are consecrated to be able to bless things, and obviously it's that sign of respect in that regard. But in the United States, I think oftentimes it's basically fallen by the wayside and is not expected, and sometimes priests are kind of surprised by it because it happens so infrequently, and it's a tradition that certainly is a laudable one, and is certainly not wrong, but it's something that in that regard here for us in the United States doesn't happen all that often. And for anybody listening, hearing about it for the first time, it's not something that is insisted upon or in any kind of way, especially if it would be something to cause wonder. For instance, if I saw if I met you at a restaurant and there's like 70 people in the restaurant that had no idea, they might kind of be almost kind of going, what's going on here? I don't understand, but and we don't want to cause too much wonder, but at the same right, it's as long as it's done respectfully and tactfully, it's it's certainly a beautiful custom, and that's in that regard, just that recognition of what His hands are or consecrated to do, what they were anointed for, and that's it's one of those things that is a beautiful custom, but once again, not expected of by us, and not expected of by most people around in American society anyways.
Well, Father, let's step up a little bit above your pay grade, and since we're on the topic of kissing, I want to make sure we circle back and talk about handshaking in general. But we're talking about kissing hands, and it's funny when you mention Hispanic, the race, the ethnicity that particularly comes to mind is Filipinos. Having grown up in Singapore and having been around a lot of Filipinos, I noticed not only do they kiss the hand, but then they sometimes press the hand to their forehead or to their cheek, sort of like it's a talisman in a non-superstitious way. I'm not trying to ascribe anything negative to it, but it just shows that devotion is actually even a step above. It's not just the kissing of the hand, but this sort of relic, sort of reverence towards the hands of a priest, which I think, frankly, those of us in America could take a little direction from.
Yes, but certainly. that spirit of it, that idea, and like you said, it's not a relic, but it is, that it shows what those cultures, the Filipinos or the Hispanics, because they're largely Catholic culture, whereas in America we're not largely a Catholic culture. That they at least through tradition, anyways, they get it a little bit more,
Absolutely. So let's step up above your pay grade and ask about kissing a bishop's ring, because I can't think of something that's done more wrong in more different ways than this little act. People are trying to figure out, what knee am I supposed to genuflect on? Do I genuflect while kissing? What do I do? And unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation or lack of enforcement on the proper ways to do things. So can you give us some guidance, please?
Sure, yes. Now, the kissing of a bishop's ring is something that, obviously is done in the United States and should be done, where the kissing of a priest's hands is more, if you yourself have adopted that custom here, then fine. But the kissing of a bishop's ring is something that should be done as the proper greeting for a bishop, not only because of the height of his office, but also for the sake of the person, to realize that there's actually an indulgence attached to the very act of kissing the ring of a bishop, and that's, that should be something that, people should, for their own sake, take advantage of. But when we do so, if you ever wanted to see normal human beings almost look like they're going to fall down because they're trying to figure out exactly how to do something that is in and of itself very simple, that is that action. A lot of times people will genuflect when kissing the ring of a bishop, but that's something that's actually reserved for someone that would be like a local ordinary, someone with actual jurisdiction of a diocese. And due to our situation in the crisis in the church, we don't have that benefit anymore. If we did, then the actual genuflection is kind of awkward in itself, because people don't realize that you should genuflect on your left knee for that, but rather than the right. But that being said, because all of our bishops are not local ordinaries, I guess we could say they're extraordinary in that regard. It's not. There is no genuflection. It is actually just kissing the ring while standing. But when doing so, the number one thing to remember in that is that it's not pulling the bishop's hand up towards your own face. It should be bringing your own face down to the bishop's ring. We're not pulling the bishop around by the hand, yanking him to and fro. We bend our faces down to the ring, kiss it, and then let it go. And then it's also, the kiss is kind of just more of a pressing it to the lips. We don't want to be kind of slobbering all over his ring and ruining it for everybody else, if you will. in that regard, it's just simply a pressing it to the lips and then releasing it, and it's something to be done, on when first seeing the bishop, if you will. I asked one time. I had asked Bishop McKenna early on when I knew him. I was down there, and I said to him one time, I see you, then you go and do something, and I'm doing something, then you come back, and then I see you again. Do I keep repeatedly kissing your ring, or do I, kind of let it go? And the response was basically, that idea of like all things in moderation. Basically, when you see me the first time, kiss the ring, and then perhaps when you're leaving for the rest of the day. But after that, a simple hello, Your Excellency, will do just fine. So I think it's that finding, that first initial greeting of kissing the ring, and then from there, letting it go. So.
Right. Well, and I think this goes back to that point that we had said, Father, that it's not your place to offer your hand to either a priest or a bishop, whether you're a man or a woman, that you should simply, again, this is an American thing. We meet somebody, we have a very egalitarian, unfortunately, both men and women feel the need to shake hands, or will put their hand out without necessarily, and especially with the clergy, you should wait. It should not be something that you presume to do. And keep in mind that the priest or the bishop may feel sick that day, so he doesn't want to extend his hand maybe to anybody. So we should wait on you. And if you extend your hand, then we can engage in the courtesies you spoke about.
Right, and in that regard, it's almost kind of trusting in your own clergymen for their own proper etiquette, and that's something that we all go through in our training in seminary. Is actually, I remember for first year of seminary for me was actually part of it was clerical etiquette of that in that regard. And I remember there's a whole entire book that I had to go through on all of the finer points of proper etiquette and being being part of the clergy. And it was it's kind of interesting because it is that a priest coming should unless like you said, unless he's either running around and he's busy or he's not feeling well and doesn't want to get someone sick or whatever it may be, a proper greeting, remembering that he is supposed to be acting like a gentleman himself, is going to be to shake hands. But that being said, not with everybody. The shaking of the hands is actually the proper thing for it. Is the priest would offer his hand and shake hands with gentlemen, and actually not do so with women. Not no offense to our female listeners, but it's a finer point of etiquette, even just in the realm of gentlemen in general, that has kind of fallen, unfortunately, by the wayside. People don't realize anymore, but especially for a priest, he would, if I showed up to a room and there was 5 people there and 3 of them were men, I would extend my hand and shake the hands of the men there, and then kind of courteously verbally greet the women and introduce myself, but not necessarily shake their hand. It's not anything to do against them, but it's more of that distinction between the proper greeting of men and women. And if a woman were to extend her hand, then I would, you would, out of courtesy, take it, but even still, it would not be, it shouldn't be this, kind of like, for lack of a better term, kind of like vice grip, squeeze handshake. It would be more of the grabbing of the fingers and with the top of her hand up and more of a genteel grasping of the hand. But that a priest, normally speaking, would not extend his hand to a woman, and just out of a couple of points. One, it's the proper etiquette for a gentleman, and then also two is also keeping in mind that just that overall all-encompassing concept of maintaining, even to the highest degree, the chastity that the priest is bound to in that regard.
It's interesting you talk about the distinction between men and women, Father, because that's something that even those of us who are seculars have to deal with in our interactions with the opposite sex. That I've written an article about this in the past, that the handshake for men should not be, even though it's become, let's say, equivalent de jure, that it doesn't mean that we have to participate in it. And I've often foiled women who've tried to shake my hand. If you can, what is normal is for a man to grasp the 4 fingers of a woman and slightly squeeze it, and your amount of your squeeze, and I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but the amount of your squeeze is concomitant with your relationship to her. So if it's just a new acquaintance or someone you've just met, it might be just a brief one, but if it's a relative or family member or a close friend, you may squeeze a little longer. But people are, I've thrown people before because they didn't, they were going in for a handshake and then they end up getting their hand squeezed and they look at me really, really strangely. But that goes back to what you were saying, that even if all the times I've ever seen bishops who have people genuflect, you don't see Bishop Dolan, scolding somebody for being improper. It's just time and place. Most people don't know. That's the reason we're doing this show today, is to save Bishop Dolan from having to correct a bunch of people. But it is not proper. And when I say it's not proper, it's a sin. But the whole point of having etiquette is to do things right. As Catholics, we have rubrics. There's a way, Father, people don't know, but even when you bend, when you bow for the Vene Sanctificator after you've blessed the bread and the wine, you're even instructed in the rubrics how your fingers are supposed to lay on the altar. And there's a way that we do things. And so in the same way, why do we genuflect on the left knee? Because that's how we do it. We don't genuflect on the right knee because that's what we do for our Lord. And so in the same way, it's not sinful if you do something incorrect, but the graciousness of the priest always allows for not having to do an on-the-spot correction. I can't imagine you telling some woman off who offered her hand and then gave you a vice grip handshake.
It's certainly. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, hopefully this is an opportunity just for us to learn in an informal way so that when we are back out there in these situations, we're more mindful and we're more thoughtful about the fact that you're not just some guy. You are metaphysically different from us, and that we need to always keep that in front of our minds. Let our eyes of faith allow us to act differently.
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing. It was, with that, in that regard, for us, in so many things, it's, a matter of choosing your battles, if you will. And when it comes to etiquette, it's certainly, that's never a battle unless it's so egregious. It's never a battle you really ever want to fight, because it's more of the, like St. Paul says, be all things to all men to save all, and it's, and it's hardly the most grievous of offenses to err on, the wrong side of a little minor point of etiquette, like you said. But some of the things, it is also that realizing that as Catholics, and especially as those few who are maintaining the faith well today, there is more expected of us in that way. We want to represent our faith all the time by how we live and how we act. And, if by being a Catholic we're called to higher things, then we're called to act in a higher way at all times, and to be a little more proper. And some of these things, actually, a lot of the stuff that we'll talk about today is kind of just more basic points of even etiquette in interactions with not only clergy, but even regular people. And depending on where you're from in the world is depending on, how much of those traditions was instilled in you when you were younger. And it's, for me, I'm from Massachusetts, and it's kind of one of those places that a lot of those old ethnic traditions kind of die a little more hard. And so it's nice. Like my father would have been very upset at me if he saw me kind of, crushing a lady's hand or not giving up my seat on a bus for a woman who came in or something like that. It's almost like I could, if I were ever to do something, I could feel, even if he wasn't there, I could feel the slap on the back of my head for it. But then you go other places and, those traditions aren't always kept as well, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't maintain for ourselves that level of properness, because people will, even in those simple actions, they'll notice there's something a little more refined. There's something a little more to this person, and they act in a higher way. Our standard should never be what is just, acceptable for the local world around us. The world is not our standard. Our Lord is our standard, and for us that means even in the small things, trying to be as proper all the time. Trying to always represent that faith that we hold and that higher calling that we all have. So.
For those of you who are just joining us, you are listening to Pastoralia on the Restoration Radio Network, back here for Season 3. I'm your host, Stephen Heiner. With me today is Father Stephen McKenna. The last sort of point here about greeting, and if you have questions for Father, if you're listening live, you can leave questions on Twitter. You can use the hashtag Pastoralia on our handle @TrueRestoration. We've changed this season. It's not just enough to use our handle, but we're using hashtags. So hashtag Pastoralia and leave your question for Father. You can also call in if you'd like. We always say that Twitter allows you to skip the line, but if you'd like to call in, you may, and we'll give that number a little bit later in the show as we get our momentum and get rolling. The last thing I wanted to cover as far as greeting go, Father, is something I was informed about from my friend Luke, who lives in Poland, a fellow hardliner, I would like to say. And he mentioned that in Poland, they greet their priest Laudetur Jesus Christus, which for the unlatined among us means praise be Jesus Christ. And then the priest offers his own greeting. Obviously, this is something completely unknown in the American context. What has been your experience with that?
Well, I've had a couple of people do that to me. I knew I've known one person at a chapel that I was at for a little while that was actually from Poland who would do the same thing. He actually talked to me about it beforehand, so I was like forewarned in that regard, which I appreciated.
He pre-gamed it with you.
Exactly. He said, this is the Polish custom, and it's a beautiful custom. And so but even though he forewarned me, I would still have to almost brace myself for it when I would see him, because it's, you almost get yourself ready. And then one time it actually happened to me up in Milwaukee one time as well, that I was just happened to be on the street, and there's a large Polish population in Milwaukee, and one of them, just a random person walking down the street, had greeted me in that way. And that time I truly was not ready for it, and you almost kind of feel like you're chasing them with the proper response after they're kind of walking away at that point. It really is a beautiful custom, but in the United States, you'd almost be hard pressed to find too many, even among the traditional clergy, that would know the proper response of like in secula secularum, or would be ready for it. And it would be something that for the Polish people that are listening, feel free to greet the priest. But if he says, hello, how are you, in response, don't be thrown off, because in reality it's probably the priest who was just not expecting it at all. So that one's kind of it kind of leaves the priest almost befuddled, if you will, for a second or two, until he realizes what just happened. Even for the best of Latin scholars among the clergy, our everyday thought process is not moving necessarily, in Latin conversation, and so when all of a sudden we just hear a phrase out of the blue, it almost, okay, wait a second, what did he just say to me? And and then, okay, yes, that's right, and so it can toss them a little bit. But that being said, it is it is a beautiful custom, and once again, it shows with the Polish people a large Catholic contingency, and that they have these beautiful customs because, as a society, largely they are of Catholic mind, anyways. So,
yeah, I like to call them rabid clericalists, but I'm all for that personally. It's that sort. I experienced that tape delay that you're talking about, Father, when it's not your native language. I have this happen to me quite a bit right now in Paris when I'll a minute later I'll realize that I said something wrong, because it's finally hit my brain. It's like, oh, I should have said this. And you think about, I'm going to chase them down and tell them the right thing, but they've already forgiven you and moved on. So that's very, very true. I also remember from my own journey from Novus Ordo to traditional Catholicism that I took a slight detour through the Byzantine Rite, and they have a very beautiful custom during Easter, right after Easter, is that, and this is just greeting from layperson to layperson. So this isn't even only clerical, that if you saw someone at church or even out in the street, or if you're writing to them, you would say Christus surrexit. And then the response would be Sicut Dixit, and either you could say Sicut Dixit and then they would respond Alleluia, or you would say Sicut Dixit Alleluia. And it was fascinating to me because, first of all, they were taking this, I think they were Latinizing probably what was a Ruthenian custom. So they probably just thought, well, we're not going to say it in Ruthenian for these Roman Rite people. We'll say it in Latin to make it easier for them. But just that sort of a seasonal awareness that, okay, we're in Easter and that it's on our mind all the time. Our Lord has risen, our Lord has risen. And again, for the unlatined among us, Christus surrexit, our Christ has risen, Sicut Dixit, as he said, Alleluia. And that was something I remember from the Byzantine Rite that I really treasure.
Yeah, I remember that from when I had, because we talked about on the Zero Show that I had gone to the Byzantine Rite for a while, and it was actually the Melkites, and they were Arabic. Luckily, they didn't do that in Arabic, but they did it in Greek for everybody. And so it was, Christus anestis, Anatos anestis, and it's, Christ is risen, he is truly risen. And, it's one thing if you cross it to Latin, but then it's a whole other thing when you start throwing in, like you said, Ruthenian or Greek or anything else, and you're just like, oh boy. So, yeah, it's, but you can see that was very edifying to see among the people, because it was, truly everybody greeted each other, all of each other in that regard. It was, that was really a beautiful and edifying point of spirituality on their part that I had fond memories of as well as you did.
So, Father, I want to transition away from greeting clergy in public and talk about greeting clergy through correspondence. So I want to stay in the greeting phase, and we'll cover some other issues. But when we're writing to clergy, and obviously I think you brought this up in pre-production for today's show, that we have to be cognizant of the LOL Twitter world invading our conversation, that whatever you want to do with your secular friends, that's fine, but that's definitely not okay for your correspondence with priests. And can you talk a little bit about your experience with correspondence and how we should correspond with priests?
Yes. It's a funny thing in that, I think writing a letter in general, because of the technological world, how to write a letter has almost completely disappeared among at least the younger people as to how to actually do that. It has so become that even before I entered seminary, when I was working, even people writing to me for business purposes would write these atrocious emails or letters that were just so unprofessional. And all I could think of was, that's how you're representing your company. Well, that's the same thing when you're trying to talk to clergy. Once again, it's, for our part, it's not, something that we're being, judgmental about or anything like that. But it is certainly very, if inappropriate language is harsh to the ears, bad form in correspondence is, I guess, harsh to the eyes in that way, just because it's off-putting in that regard. And people have lost just how to form a letter or how to write a proper sentence or anything. But I think the first and foremost thing is the proper salutation to a cleric is based on his office. So if you're writing to a bishop, it's the salutation is not hey bishop, or how you doing, or anything like that. It's your excellency, and same thing to a priest. If you're writing to a priest, it should be Reverend Father so and so, or at the very least, dear Father so and so. And it's important in the name to realize the distinction of amongst priests. I mean, for bishops, it's a little more easy in that regard. It's your excellency, and that pretty much covers any bishop that you'll come across. But for a priest, there's the realization that there's two different types of priests, and this one oftentimes, not only in writing but also in speech, gets kind of lost, and that is that there are religious priests and that there are secular priests. So, for instance, I'm a secular priest. I'm not part of a religious order, and I don't take the three vows of the religious, nor do I use a religious name. So, when it's a secular priest like myself, the proper greeting is Father McKenna, using my last name, and that covers any priest that is not part of a religious order. But if they're part of a religious community, say, for instance, the CMRI, they all take religious names, and it's not their given name; it's a name they've chosen for their religious life, and then in those situations, they should be greeted by their religious name. So, for instance, Father Benedict or Father Gabriel, that as their chosen name for religious life is what they would be addressed by. So realizing that difference there, secular priest's last name, religious priest's first name, not always easy to remember, but not something that we crusade about, but at the same time, it's the proper greeting in that regard, both in writing and in speech.
Right, Father. And it's funny because I think that part of that is informed by an overcorrection from Father Bob, right? So we're so used to Father Bob or Father Chuck that trads retreat into this unconditional, well, everybody's going to go by their last name, and they don't realize that is not how it works. And so everyone is Father last name to them. And for example, one of our guests, Father Bernard Utley, who's a Benedictine, I was corresponding with some people, and they're like, Father Utley. I'm like, it's not Father Utley, it's Father Bernard. And so you may not crusade. I'm happy to crusade about it, Father. But this goes back to what we were saying today is it's important. We have these traditions, and just because someone's poisoned the well, just because the Novus Ordo is poisoned the well by making everybody Father Bob, it doesn't mean that you can't remember it's Father Gabriel or it's Father Benedict if it's a religious priest. It's not difficult. It just takes some getting used to if you haven't done it. And again, no one's gonna shout at you. It's like, don't call me by my last name. They're not gonna do that. But it's just something that you need to be mindful of as you correspond with priests. And also, I guess in this case, speak to them. You would say Father Benedict as opposed to Father Hughes.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's the thing, and it oftentimes will be what priests they're around normally. If for instance, here at St. Gertrude's, people here are surrounded by secular priests all the time, so it's natural for them to say Father, whatever the last name is, McKenna, McGuire, or, Chicada, whatever it is. And so when they see a CMRI priest on the occasions that they do, it's just the natural thing for them to say the last name. And same in the opposite, when I have some friends out that I know in Spokane, and they're surrounded by religious priests all the time, and so then they will end up slipping up and saying, Father Stephen, and it's like, I know where it's coming from. I know that they don't mean any any wrong by it, but it's just what they've become accustomed to and used to. And sometimes I guess it just takes a little bit of thought, especially in a letter. One can kind of basically say, okay, slip of the tongue or lapse in thought on that. But when it's a letter, you have more time to think it out and, try to, I guess that's the thing, try to put forth that effort in it. And I guess that's probably the point of most of what we talk about. It's trying to make that cognizant effort to do the best we can with these points,
Well, and I think you addressed it right at the beginning. There's a broader problem in our society about letter writing. It's something that I grew up, I was taught how to letter write. I still to this day letter write. I sent some letters today, actually. It's something I take a lot of joy in. I mean, partly probably because I'm a writer and my degree's in English and I've always loved to write, but it's just something that is something you have in common with everyone from
right.
in civilization going back some time. So I think your point is, if you haven't been taught to write a letter, probably you might want to take a step back when you're corresponding with priests and take a little bit of extra time and look at letter writing in general. I'm sure there are articles about it. There are ways to go about learning how to write a letter. There's a proper introduction, there's a close, there's greetings, there's that sort of thing. And we've lost that as a society. So necessarily it trickles down to this particular situation when you're dealing with priests.
Yeah. And that's, it's one of those things that most people, today have a computer and computer access, and it's very easy. You go to Google and type in, formal letter, and it'll pop up with the proper format for you, and you just, there you go. You can pick right off of that format and go with it, remembering how to greet someone and close and make it proper in that way. But also in it, that body, like you had mentioned at the beginning, of not using abbreviations, not using the Twitter speak or the texting speak and all of that. That is
no LOLs to Father McKenna.
No, certainly not in letters or emails. Those things are it's like a dumbing down of society. We can't be. And when you write a letter, it's one thing if you're texting and you send something like that, and okay, it's a point of basically, I'm going to be here forever if I write this out. But it's when you're writing out a letter, it's it kind of shows I couldn't be bothered to write it out, and that's just not once again not a point of being proper in that regard, and it's a dumbing down of society. Now it's not, and you should, people when they send us a letter or an email, or just in general when you send a letter or an email to someone, you should proof your email and letter a little bit to make sure you've actually written what you want to say and that you're using proper grammar to the best of your knowledge and proper spelling and things like that. It's just the dictionaries still exist in the world, and as does spell check or whatever, and we can. It's not that we're expecting to have a long debate over use of the Oxford comma or something in that regard, but and we're not going to pick it apart down to that level. But if you're it should be to the best of everybody's ability, trying to at least make a fairly decent sentence that is has a subject, a verb, and a verb in it at least. So it's and with punctuation and things like that. So it's like I said, not that we're going to be perfect all the time, and even ourselves, we're going to not always be perfect in it, but we can try to do the best we can with it, and certainly not just launch something out there that's that we didn't think about it at least a little bit in that regard.
Well, and going a little deeper than that, Father, and again, for those of you who are just joining us, you are listening to Pastoralia, episode number 1 on Restoration Radio. We're kicking off season 3 today with Father McKenna. And if you'd like to give us a call, if you have any questions, I'm going to try to keep it on topic. So if you're going to call, make sure that it's about clerical etiquette. If you have suggestions for a future show, you can email us at Pastoralia. That's just pastoral with an IA, Pastoralia at truerestoration.org. And you can leave questions and we might address them on future shows. But if you're going to call today, make sure it's germane to clerical etiquette. Not clerical etiquette, etiquette towards clerics. And our telephone number is 949-272-9417. Again, that's 949-272-9417. It's Friday morning over there in the States, so it may not be a time when everyone's listening to the show live, but if you are, feel free to call. And as we said before, if you're in the office and you need to be a little bit more circumspect, you can sneak in a question on Twitter by using @TrueRestoration with the hashtag Pastoralia. And Father, like I said, going back to the manner, if we accept that you want a certain manner, when we're talking about the content, we think about our interactions. And I recently had a sort of customer service issue with a company that was supposed to send me something it didn't. And if I look back at my email trail and across 4 or 5 emails, I continue to have a escalating tone of expectation. The escalation in my interaction in this customer service situation wasn't with a priest. So I probably felt that I could be a little bit more forceful than I might have been with a priest. Can you talk about sometimes, if you feel comfortable or if you can come up with them off the top of your head, where someone's taken maybe the wrong tone with you, or they haven't realized? I think a lot of times people don't, and I think that's maybe the worst part, is they don't even know what they don't know. Can you talk a little bit about tonality and how we need to be mindful of this? Because we may be resolving disputes or be involved with something like this with a priest sometimes, and that's something obviously we could take instruction on.
Right. I think that's more like a 2-part issue. One is in writing, and especially email correspondence, and the other is in speaking and talking about things. I'll take the writing one first, because we're kind of organically from the letters, and especially with emails, because electronic mail can be sent off so quickly. You type something up, and then you hit send, and it's once it's gone, and there's nothing you can do to get it back again. And it's important to realize that the assumption on either end of it, the priest's end or the person corresponding's end, should never be one of inserting your tonality into that letter. I remember when I was, like I was saying before, before I entered seminary, I was a businessman. I was a commercial property manager, and we had an outside source come in and do an entire meeting on email etiquette for us, so we could be the most professional in nature as possible with our correspondence. And one of the first things, and the thing that was stressed so much, is never assume the emotional state, if you will, of the person sending you a correspondence, because you might read something and think, oh, this person is so angry at me, or this person is really upset, or whatever it is, and in reality, it's more of inserting your own feelings into that rather than what is actually coming from the person, because there is no change in pitch when you're reading something. And so, first off, that assumption always has to be there, that I'm not going to assume that Father's mad at me because he has put something bluntly and straightforward in that regard. It's not necessarily the case. And for our part, we try to be very good about making sure that when we say things, sometimes it has to be straightforward, it has to be blunt, and sometimes, forceful, if you will, in verbiage, but it's not something that necessarily means that we're yelling at you out of some emotional rant. we're, I can speak for myself and the clergy that I work with here, and I know that from experience and from seeing all of them, it's usually when we write something, it's something that we think out before we hit that send button. It's not something that is let go without proper thought and making sure that it says to the best of our ability at that time what we want to say, and we do everything we can to remove any kind of emotion from it and be as objective and mindful of the situation as possible. And that should be reciprocated from the other end. Just don't assume that we're our own emotion towards it, and also don't try to try to, when you write in response, have that same emotional detachment from it. Try to just deal with the issue at hand. Going from there is that in general, both in writing and in speech, but especially in conversation as well, dealing with an issue like you talked of, it's, we as priests try to make ourselves as approachable as possible. We don't claim to see everything that goes on all the time in a parish, especially if it's someplace that we come in for a few days and then have to leave. We're traveling into, or whatever it may be. So we don't see necessarily always what is going on, and so we are approachable, and we do take into consideration concerns that people want to raise about what may be going on there, or what may be being said, or anything like that. And sometimes the eyes and ears on the ground, if you will key us into an issue that may need to be dealt with. That being said, I think people don't realize that we do see more than they realize, and sometimes there's all sorts of, depending on whatever the situation is, there's different ways that we need to handle it. And so if you raise a question or an issue or something to be discussed with a priest, you should feel free to be able to bring it, but then realize that with the clergy that that we're dealing with, that it's we've all had very good instructors and good instruction, and generally speaking, we know what we're doing, and just trust us on that. Trust that if you bring up a grievance or an issue and it doesn't get dealt with in the time or the manner that you want it to, it's not because we're ignoring you or discounting what you're saying, but trust that we know. Basically, we know kind of what we're doing in that regard, and that we're going to take care of it. And if it's something that is sometimes better just left people to come to it on their own, or to then sometimes quiet is the best way to approach it. Or sometimes people, a priest might pull someone aside privately and deal with it, and we're not going to get up in the pulpit and shout about every little grievance that comes down, especially, and we're not going to get ourselves involved in something that's a he said, she said type of situation, and all of that. It's just present it with respect, and then and trust that the priest will take it into consideration. But in the end, trust that whatever decision he makes on that is going to be good in that regard. And then in that way, everybody is exercising their humility due to that state. It actually reminds me a little bit of like during the ordination, right, of a priest, in that regard, that there's that point in the ordination where the bishop says, if there's anybody who knows for some reason that this priest should not be ordained, let him speak now, but remember your state in the church. And it's like, okay, remember, the proper roles. It's just like a child to a parent. It's if one child is doing something obnoxious, then the other child can bring it up to their parents. But if they shouldn't assume to insert their own way of how they want it handled upon the parent at that point. No, their job as child is to be humble and to trust that their parents are going to do all that they can do to do what's best for the family, and it's kind of a knowing role in a situation, I guess. It's always a little delicate in that area, because I don't want to. I'm not trying to at all in any kind of way belittle the advice or the concerns of people, and far be it from it. I want to be as approachable as possible, but at the same time, don't think that you have the only knowledge of how to handle it, and if it's not done, according to your idea, then it's somehow it's wrong in that regard. So.
Right, and again, you're touching on something that's a bigger issue, Father. When you talked about that workshop, I remember a book that was written very early on called Send, which was about proper etiquette for email. And it was so strange because I thought normally etiquette settles in after a while, but it was a very helpful book because you think it's so funny. I'm getting a book to read about something that's done electronically. This was really before the dawn of the Kindle, but it was really, really helpful in a number of ways in my professional life. But it talked about, if you're going to sit down and write, the mother of all emails, maybe just pick up the phone, because email allows us the easy way out. You can say everything you want to say and you don't have to deal with anybody. The flip side of that is you can say anything you want to say and you don't have to watch your tone. And sometimes when you're sitting down, ask yourself, is this something that would be better handled on the telephone? And not just in our secular life, but sometimes this really works out well with priests. We all know of situations where friendships have ended over text message or email simply because the tone was wrong. And you're right, it's a totally flat medium. I can't detect tone. I mean, we can put things in all caps and put lots of exclamation marks, but it doesn't really do the same thing that the nuance of a voice change can do. So that's something we need to be aware of.
Correct.
I have an email question.
Sure,
go ahead, Father.
I was going to say that, and in addition to that is also that idea of, sometimes things, sometimes the only way to see truly where someone else is coming from when they're concerned about something is to actually, talk to them, and because you only kind of get like pieces of information oftentimes in emails, and especially any kind of like text messaging or Twitter, where you're reduced to 140 words or less, or blogs or whatever it may be. And a lot of times those violations, not just against of etiquette, but against common decency in those realms, can disappear because it's kind of like the old adage, everybody's really brave to say what they want to say in the most harshest of terms when they're, if you will, typing from their parents' basement behind a false name in a blog, but it's, right. But, would you, you have to think to yourself when you're writing something like that, would I say this to this person's face, and how am I, and the way I am wording it, would I speak it that way to them? And also with that, am I following not only etiquette, but the grounds of, the proper line of Christian charity? That's, it always should, our deferral should always be coming back to that line of charity. I mean, there's no greater commandment from our Lord than that of charity. And, if we're going to err on one side or the other of correspondence or interaction or anything at all, it should always be on that default of the side of charity in that regard.
Yeah, I'm never surprised by what people are willing to say on anonymous forums about animal, vegetable, or mineral. It's just it's like a no holds barred license to say whatever you want. It's unfortunate. I lament it a lot. That's why we always try to be transparent and use our real names whenever we're writing. But it gives some people their electronic courage, shall we say?
Yeah.
We've got a couple of questions, Father, while we're here. First one's by email from someone who just would like to remain anonymous. But their question was, Father, this doesn't apply to all of us, but what's the rule if someone in your family is a priest? Do you call him by his first name? And I'm sure you've dealt with this, and I'm guessing there probably isn't a universal answer here. It's probably just a custom, but could you give us some enlightenment on that?
Yeah, the rule of if someone in your family is a priest, there's, and if you will, in that regard, there's an extreme level of familiarity there. My parents, if I talk to them outside of, any kind of public setting, if I call up my mother and my father on the phone and I'm by myself, I'm not sitting here expecting them to follow, to a T every line of clerical etiquette, because there's such a level of familiarity that they change my diapers type of thing, and it's
right.
that it's that for them to call me like just to say hi Steve, how are you, that is certainly not in the least way offensive at all. I mean, it's in that way it is not violating any kind of proper mode of speaking. What I tell my family and things like that is, if it's me and you and other family members or whatever, kind of, if like the true inner circle of our family, or those who are, real close friends that I've known for, since my early childhood and things like that, if it's just me and you, or just, that type of group setting, then, don't feel obliged to call me, Father McKenna in that regard. But what I do ask of them, and they're very good about, is that if I'm in a public setting, and say they were to come to the church and to either talk to me or to talk about me with other people, then to have it more proper that it's Father McKenna then, so as long as they can draw that line easily enough with themselves so that they're following that in that regard, then there's no problem in referring to to my mother calling me by my first name just because it's just me and her talking on the phone or something like that. So it doesn't always it's not like a 24/7 always having to be in a place when it's talking about someone that close to you in those times.
Okay, very good. And I'm sure there's some slippage there too. Sometimes, they might call you Father McKenna in a private setting, or they might call you Stephen in a public setting. But right. the spirit is there, right? They have the principles in place. Along Correct. With that, we have a question from David on Twitter. Father, are there any online articles we could read to learn or review all of this information? God bless.
That's a good question. I haven't, as for specific articles written online in clerical etiquette, I'm not sure that I've come across anything in particular. A lot of the stuff that I'm drawing from is from really two places. One is a lot of it because that relation between people to clergy, and then also that etiquette that follows there. 90% of it is just what proper etiquette would be for a Catholic gentleman or a Catholic lady should be overall anyways. And so there's plenty of articles that are written about proper etiquette in society in general, and you can get most of your ideas from that, cover most of your bases, if you will, in that regard. And then also that some of it is drawing from books that I've read in the past as well, about where they are written for clergy as regards to what their etiquette should be and their behavior should be towards people. So it's a good question. I don't know. I will. What I can say is I can look to see if there's anything that I can recommend, and perhaps I can send it to you, Stephen, by email if I find something, and maybe you can make it known and available for David or anybody else who would like to know that. But it's something that I don't know that someone has actually written an article of this is how lay people should interact with traditional clergy. I don't know that is necessarily out there, at least not as of yet. So
there is an article which I just linked to. I put it on there from our I can't quite say friends or colleagues. I would say our fellow workers at Tradition in Action, and it's a good one. It covers something. It has some overlap with some of what we're talking about today, but with a little bit of a twist for those who are in the Novus Ordo Church. I think there's a part of the article that says, "What if Father insists on being called Father Bob?" and how to deal with that. So, David, I replied to your tweet with a link to that article, and anyone else interested in that can just hit expand on David's tweet, and you can see that article. It's got some overlap with some of the stuff that Father and I have been talking about today, but also has some other advice. And as Father said, if we come across anything between now and the next show, we'll either put it up on Twitter or we'll bring it up at the beginning of next show. I think you'll see this throughout the season is that at the beginning of each show, we'll pick up any loose ends from the previous show. So if there's anything Father runs into or I run into or we hear from properly written correspondence from our listeners, we will share that with you at the top of the following show and before we dive into our next topic. So hopefully those answers those two questions. And for those of you who are just joining us, you are listening to Pastoralia on the Restoration Radio Network. I'm Stephen Heiner. I'm here with Father Stephen McKenna. And we are going through the proper way to interact and treat our clergy, who are very dear to us and very rare in these times of crisis. And Father, we've talked about greeting. Okay, let's go a level deeper now, and let's talk about what happens when we actually have you over for dinner. And I suppose we can get into your preferences for what kind of food you like some other show. But when we do have you over, can you walk us through some things? And again, there's a larger, anytime we're addressing the clerical specifics of a societal issue, we have to keep in mind that obviously there's a way that we have people over in the real world that aren't clerics. So there are some guidelines there. But whether we like it or not, that seems to have to be reiterated, and I think you're going to do that for us. So walk through the proper way to host a priest and what we should talk about, what we shouldn't talk about, what people should be wearing, and hopefully we won't get too deep into the weeds there.
Yeah. I think, in regards to the quote unquote, my favorite food, one thing they shouldn't necessarily worry about is Father going to like every single thing that I'm making? Don't, sometimes, people get so concerned, and I'll get, three phone calls about, oh, do you like chicken? Well, yes, that's fine. And it's, you shouldn't so overly concern yourself. You should make sure that someone doesn't have an allergy to something. And if you're making something really kind of, off the wall, different, sort of like the picture of your raw beef that you had online, Stephen, or something like that. You might want to check about something in that regard. But if it's standard food, just it's you can assume that what you're making is probably fine, and it's you don't have to worry yourself sick that is Father going to like what I've made? Is he going to? I mean, you should try to, obviously, with any dinner invite, please people as best you can, but don't be so concerned that each and every article has to be his absolute favorite or whatever it may be. But that being said, proper greeting or hosting of priests for a dinner, once again, should basically fall under for the most part, the realm of proper hosting of any somewhat formal meal. It's not, it should be something that is, sort of a special occasion, if you will, to put it in terms of that. It should be something that you make sure your house is clean. Don't have just just stuff left everywhere, and make sure that the places that he's going to go to are within within reason, that are clean and kept up well, that that he feels comfortable there, and that for dress it should be that it should be kind of like that same type of thought that kind of like if you were going to church, women should make sure that they're wearing proper modest dress and or a skirt or something like that, and then modest attire, and men should be wearing a proper dress attire. Not necessarily have to be in a 3-piece suit when doing so. It's not necessarily a wedding, but it should be something. It shouldn't be blue jeans and the ratty old 2001 World Series T-shirt or something like that you're pulling out for the occasion either. It should be
only the finest for you, Father.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So it's it should be people should take pride in their appearance of their home, and take pride in the appearance of themselves, not pride in a bad way, but pride in the sense that I'm going to be becoming of what I'm doing here. I'm recognizing the situation and recognizing that I should dress to meet that situation in that regard. And from there, basically, like I said, mostly with it, proper meal etiquette would take over. So when he arrives at your house, especially now in the cold weather, take his jacket from him and his hat and scarf or whatever it may be. Take it from him, hang it up for him, invite him in. It was interesting in talking with Bishop Sanborn one time. A comment was made about something that gets overlooked in appearance for people is wear shoes. I think a lot of people probably don't wear shoes all the time in their own home, and that's fine. But it is part of proper etiquette. If you're having someone over to your house, wear shoes yourself, and certainly don't ask Father to take his shoes off as he's coming in to the door. He'll do his best to wipe his feet and everything, but it's kind of that more refined and proper part to it all is have all. It's kind of the no shirt, no shoes, no service type of type of attitude we should have at least in our own homes, and in that regard. So it's to that proper appearance in that regard, but also just take his coat, take his hat, offer him something to drink. If dinner is not, don't feel if he's taken time to come to your house to be there for dinner, then you can assume that there's no super rush on anything. So you don't have to feel like you have the time everything to be done as soon as he walks in the door, so he can go right to the table and all of that. As long as he feels comfortable and at home, then give him something to drink. You can sit and talk and those things, and don't keep the guest waiting for forever, but at the same time, don't feel rushed in any kind of way. It should be an enjoyable experience that for everybody. That the most important thing of it is not the meal itself, but the company and the conversation to be had during those times. And so just invite him in and make him feel at home, and have a good, pleasant conversation with him at dinner. Make sure that to do grace and allow the priest to bless the food, and and whatever else there may be. If you would like to have the priest lead some prayers like the rosary at some point, then that's fine too. Maybe discuss it with him beforehand just to make sure, and then from there just serve a nice meal in that regard. So don't it would be improper to ask him to to take after he finishes. Okay, Father, just bring your plate up to the sink now. I mean, it's not that we're incapable of.
You want to
go ahead
and grab a dish rag. You're going to be at the end of the line here. You'll be drying
exactly.
dishes. We're not gonna put you to work doing the dishes, hopefully.
Right. So it's not that we're incapable of doing so, and certainly not that we don't do so in our own homes. But once again, that mindset. He's a guest. He's he's give him the place of honor at the table. Welcome him in and treat him in a very proper and cordial manner in that regard. And then and then with that also realize that the priest is there and to visit with you and to talk with you and to spend time with you. But if he does finally get to the point in the evening and he says, I have to get going, I have certain things I have to take care of, or whatever it may be, just he gets up to leave, don't if you had a mindset of him staying a little longer or something like that, don't take offense to it. It's not the last time you're going to see him. It's you'll be all right, and don't take offense to it. Sometimes he does have to get back to either finish some prayers or get some work done, or even just to get a good night's sleep if he has something that begins really early in the morning or whatever it may be. Let him let him go. He's glad to be there, and I guess that goes for any conversation with the priest. He's glad to converse with anybody and everybody, but if he does excuse himself, know that it's not meant as an offense. It's just meant as I have to move on to the next thing now, and don't ever be offended by that in any regards. And
I actually think, Father, it's something that's important. Obviously, whenever you're dealing with a parish and you deal with, 6 different places, so you have any number of permutations of invitations you could receive. But I do think it's important for a Catholic family to host priests for dinner, not because they need to put on an extravagant show, but their children need to be taught how to interact in front of priests. Also, they need to be shown that it is appropriate for priests to be cooked for and waited on, and it will give them on-the-job training. They'll get to see that, and with all the invitations you have, I think a Catholic family should at least once a year be extending an invitation to a priest. I know some parishioners are more enthusiastic about this. You may get more invitations from some than from others, but I do think, I wouldn't say it's obviously not an obligation, but I do think it's something healthy and worthwhile. And of course, I'm sure you're not going to protest about having dinner cooked for you, Father, but I think this is something that's good, that should be done just as a part of Catholic education, frankly.
Oh, for sure. And I think it extends beyond just, teaching kids how to host and behave around clergy, but also it teaches them overall a lot of lessons in that regard, because it shows them, first off, that there are certain expectations. You should have respect for clergy, but at the same time, the priest is coming to your house. He's talking with the family. He's joking with the family at times, and in that regard, it puts that priest in a position where he's now more approachable to those children. So if they have a question, they're not necessarily afraid as, okay, that's Father so-and-so, he's the guy that I see on Sunday, and and it's almost like he's untouchable. No, he's come to my house, he's eaten there before. I have a question about a certain thing in morality or faith or whatever. I know that I can go and talk to them, and it's not a big scary experience or anything like that. And so it teaches both respect and also creates a situation of an openness for especially the children later on to be able to approach a priest more easily in that regard for better care of their souls. And also, if they know the priest, they like the priest, and in that regard, it'll also make the faith in general something more that they'll be able to love in their lives. okay, I know the priest. I have good memories from when I was a little kid of him coming over, and he's able to help apply the faith to my life, and now it's something that your child, when he or she gets a little older and is having to make decisions on their own, it's going to still stick with them and be something that will help them in the long run of loving the faith and living it themselves.
For those of you who are just joining us, you are listening to Pastoralia on the Restoration Video Network. This is episode 1, and we're talking about the proper etiquette towards clerics. We're getting close towards the end of our show, so I am going to say there aren't going to be any more phone calls, but we may be able to take in 2 more questions on Twitter. Again, @TrueRestoration is our handle. You can hashtag Pastoralia with your question. And Father Stephen McKenna has been walking us through quite a lot today. And Father, we're running a little short on time. And as you just talked about, we don't want to steal clergy's time. So we want to make sure that we respect your time as well. You've got a lot of other things to get to before the end of the week. And I just want to talk about 2 more things, if I might, before we close out our show. And the first is remembering that there really are things that aren't appropriate for priests, that we can get into an argument or at least a discussion. I know my colleague Nicholas would probably be a partisan of this, about, for example, let's say giving someone a high five or going to karaoke. I think your Catholic antenna should turn on and say, I probably shouldn't ask Father to come to karaoke with us, because he's not going to sing. No matter how good his voice is, he's not going to do it. Not because you're not a fun person, but because this starts to get into the problem of, you do realize that I have a dignity as a priest, and that there are some things I had to leave behind when I left the lay state. And there's nothing immoral about karaoke. There's nothing immoral about giving someone a high five, but it's not okay for priests. Can you
Right.
clarify that, Father?
Right, exactly. And that's, is kind of part of the, if you will, if there was actually a class on it, like clerical 101, if you will. It's, from the very beginning of your seminary training, it's the realization that, all that formation in seminary, and all those little points of discipline and correction and things like that, the reason why they're there is not just, to keep a tight lid on the ship, if you will, but it's to create something of that priest that is, when you're forming someone into a priest through seminary, you're making them to be something that is not necessarily what they're used to. You're truly transforming them as a whole person into this office, not just mass. I say mass and say my breviary, and then outside of that, I'm just a normal Joe. No, it's truly a transformation of life as a whole. And there are things that are perfectly fine and acceptable and for normal everyday lay people to do, that a priest should not do. And it's, like I said, it's nothing to do with it being bad. They're perfectly fine, but he has to remember all the time that he is always a priest, and he has to uphold that image and that dignity of the office which he possesses, which God has called him to. And so things like you said, high-fiving, it's just, nothing looks stranger than, there's the priest in cassock and, white cuffs and everything, and then, he throws up the big over-the-top high five with the big loud slap, and then, the pat on the back or anything like that. It's just, all of that, that proper appearance of the office all of a sudden just very quickly vanishes. And even if we don't think of it in that moment, and we don't think, hey, that's improper or something like that, even if we don't think of it in that moment, in our subconscious, then the office of that priest, and even priests in general, is diminished in a small way. And everything we do in our ministry is based on our reputation, is based on our carrying ourselves well, our interacting with people well. Everything that we do, or I shouldn't say everything, but basically pretty much everything is built on prayer and on our and on presenting ourselves well, because we no longer represent. I no longer represent myself. I represent the church, and we have to realize that there's that generalization there. So yeah, so you're not going to, think of how much damage that image of a priesthood would be if all of a sudden you saw, if you saw one of the priests, there in someone's basement, belting out, like Michael Jackson's "Man in the Mirror" or something like that. It's just not. It's just
the worst ever there, Father. I have a follow-up on that, Father. I just wanted to let our listeners. So we've definitely had some technical challenges on our first show today, and we are coming towards the end. We've got about 2 minutes left in our live stream, and I still got one more thing I want to cover with Father. So we're going to go into a little bit of overtime. So for those of you who are listening live, we didn't disappear. Nothing's wrong with your computer. If Father and I get cut off in the next couple minutes, we're going to keep recording, and then we'll finish up. And when the show posts, you can fast forward to the end and hear the last 5 or 7 minutes and catch up on what Father and I. But apologies for that. We'll get our technical issues sorted, and we'll continue, especially since our number of shows this year has doubled from last season. We promise that we'll get this well in hand moving forward. Anyway, Father, it reminded me, you talked about imaging our Lord not only as the spouse of the church, but being an alter Christus. And our Lord said, "Noli me tangere," don't touch me, and not in an offensive way. But there's a reason our Lord said that, and I was very cognizant of this. Bishop Sanborn had talked about this as not just a discipline among lay people to clergy, but among clergy to clergy. I mean, there are those of us who, like myself, because of my family background, we tend to be a more touchy-feely family, and that this is something that is definitely not okay with priests, and not just not okay with priests, but priests don't do that to other priests and seminarians, et cetera. There's a sort of aura of noli me tangere. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's I think it can best be kind of almost summed up as in 2 parts. First off is that or 2 points, I should say. First is that point that is spoken of in that little the little piece that was done by the Curia of Ars, that it says, talks of the priest that he is a part of every family, but a member of none. And that thought of we aren't, yes, we're there to visit with you. Yes, we're there to, we're going to be friendly. Yes, we're going to be, hope to be approachable and even, and even familiar with people and to some extent. But it's always that recognition that as much as you know us, as much as you interact with us, it doesn't make us part of your family, and it's not a bad thing. It's something we've renounced in our own way. We've given up of ourselves, and that brings to the second point, the black worn by the priest. He no longer belongs to himself. He's at least in a spirit dead to the things of the world, and that includes those normal and healthy things like close friendship with the people of the lay feel and everything like that. It's not that we're not friendly or not that we're not close to people, but it's at the same time there has to be a little bit of a distance, a little bit of a separation, so that when if there was ever a situation that required dealing with from a clerical a duty point of view, for instance if my own family were coming to St. Gertrude's, and then all of a sudden I saw my father do something that was off of what he should be doing, I need to have at least enough detachment even in that situation to be able to provide that correction that's necessary there, to look beyond simply that look beyond simply that familiar type of setting, and also that level of thinking that oh well, he's my son, or oh, he's my my really great friend, and so therefore I might be able to get away with this, or I'm might be able to speak to him in a tone that's inappropriate or something like that. No, there has to always be that separation. He no longer belongs to anybody else. He belongs to Christ and Christ alone, and to His church. And so there's always that recognition. It's always that keeping of ourselves to be as best as we can, to be of something that yes, I'm friendly, yes, I'm nice, and I try to be all things to all men, like St. Paul said. But at the same time, it has to be, as much as one might like, Father so-and-so, there always has to be that recognition of that line that cannot be crossed. I can't accept him in so much that I've done away with that office that he holds in my relationship with him. And so priests are very careful with that, to make sure that it is always kept at least at a little bit of a distance in regards to that recognition of that office, because that's the fundamental basis for like I said, a lot of the work that we all do in this. There has to be a certain level of respect due to a priest, and there has to be a certain level of understanding that he's not there at my every beck and call as well, and because he has to care for all of the things that he's responsible for. So I think that's a large part of that that distance that you sometimes can be perceived in that regard. Also, is part of it is not so he doesn't appear to have favorites in a parish setting. That can't be done either. Obviously, naturally speaking, there might be people that are easier to get along with for him, but he can't make it be. He has to do everything that he can to make it be that someone's is going to say, well, so and so can approach him, but that's because Father likes them. I don't think Father likes me, so therefore I can't ask him a question because he only likes certain people. That just would be so contrary to it. So we have to try to be, if you will, kind of equal in that regard, and try to be, and that means being removed a little bit. So. And then once again, with interaction with priests, other priests and things like that is, we also have to respect the office that, our own brother priests hold as well. And also remember that, especially in public, that they have to, we have to uphold their own dignity in that regard. And so, even if we're very close friends with them as, on a natural level, we have to realize that, okay, but at the same time, he's a priest, I'm a priest, and we both still have to come off as such, in every aspect of our lives. It's not a show that we're putting on. We're not putting on a cover that, like, okay, I appear as priest all, in these times. It has to be, in order for it to be consistent all the time, it has to be something that we live all the time, and that's and that has to, truly be part of us.
I think all those points are well taken, Father, and I don't want to get too deep into my last question today, because I actually think it'll be the topic of another show we might do, or it actually might go up to the Clerical Conversations show. For those unfamiliar with how these two shows will work in tandem this year, is Pastoralia is going to try to answer those, let's say, smaller in scope questions that can be answered in under 20 minutes per topic. And today we sort of did that in different segments. And Clerical Conversations is going to take on those bigger issues thing that's going to take maybe 45 minutes to unpack. So as you're thinking about questions that you want to send, we'll direct them to the right places. And the last question I'm going to ask you today, Father, touches on spiritual direction, which again may be a show that goes to either one. It may be an episode for either one of our shows. But what is the obedience that we owe to a priest, both, let's say, ordinarily and in the current crisis? And we'll wrap up with that last question.
Okay. Well, ordinarily, which, like we talked about a little bit at the beginning, ordinarily, there were priests had certain levels of jurisdiction and rights to certain levels of obedience. So if a pastor of a canonically appointed pastor of a church, had the right to ask of obedience of certain things of people, not, certainly not like they were, part of a religious community, but certain things, he had a right to ask of. Now there's no strict jurisdiction, but we follow that same mindset of the church, and it has to be looked at by the people as something of, they call us father for a reason. It should be a mindset of children to their parents. Okay, out of a spirit of obedience, I should follow the instructions of a priest. So, if a priest mentions something in a sermon as a direction, it's a point of, you might not like it, and it might not be something that he has, like I said, strict jurisdiction to hold. But at the same time, out of prudence and out of the spirit of obedience, should I follow the directions of a good priest? Yeah, absolutely. And then, even more so if it's something that is in a situation of, if you've asked a priest for spiritual direction and he gives you direction, whether you might not necessarily like what you have heard, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that that you should just dismiss it, because you've asked him for a direction. He's trained and ordained to give that direction. You should follow it. A person will never make progress if they don't follow the direction of their spiritual director. And then even more so in confession. If it's in a confessional setting and the priest tells you to do something, you have to realize that at that point, it's no longer Father McKenna or Father Cicada or whoever that's giving you the direction. Now it is, that is truly, personified the Alter Christus point. And it's, now I've branched into the realm of confession, and I really got to do what the priest is telling me to do in that regard. So it's kind of, I think oftentimes, especially with the current crisis, people kind of get away from that and say like, oh yeah, well, the priest has told me to do something, but he doesn't really have any authority, so I don't necessarily have to listen to him. But I think that's just a really foolish mindset to take. On the flip side, we shouldn't. You shouldn't expect the priest to be micromanaging your life, asking him to when you can breathe and, when you can take a drink of water and things like that either. It may sound ridiculous, but I've seen it. I've seen it out there, and that they ask of clergy sometimes, kind of almost to the points of ridiculousness, and it's like, that's a you can figure that out on your own type of thing. He's not going to tell you every waking move that you need to make as well. So.
Well, and I think that's as good a place as any for us to wrap up, Father. As usual, thanks so much for your time. As we said in the last earlier today, if you have any questions for Father, you can actually find Father on, I almost forgot, you can find Father on Twitter and you can message him directly. And I think you're at Rev McKenna. Is that right, Father?
That's correct, yes. Yeah, someone else can follow McKenna.
At REVMCKENNA, at Rev McKenna. And just keep in mind, if you want to talk about something private, you'll need to make sure that you mention that to Father. You can only direct message, that's private message on Twitter, if both of you follow each other. So before you start, sharing something with Father, make sure that it's something that you can discuss there, or you can email him directly. At Rev McKenna, you can also email us pastoralia at truerestoration.org, or leave something on our Twitter handle at truerestoration with the hashtag Pastoralia. Pastoralia is going to be the first Friday of every month, not only because that way Father can remind you to get to First Friday devotions if they're available for you, because that's when we are on. So we are on first Fridays at 11 a.m. on the East Coast of the United States. So our next show will be the first Friday of February. I need to take a quick look at the calendar for that, but I believe that is the 7th of February will be our next show. And Father and I will talk a little bit more in pre-production for that show about what the topics will be, but expect them to be, again, like this, short topics, things that people want to ask about, maybe at Coffee and Donuts, but they never get around to it. And we hope that this show has been helpful and more than anything, reminded you to be mindful of how you interact with your priest, not to be on autopilot. I think a lot of times, and I'm guilty of this as well, we're on autopilot for a lot of our relationships, and really to have that red light on when you're dealing with priests to remember that he's an alter Christus, he's there in the place of our Lord, and he needs particular and mindful treatment. Anything else you'd like to add, Father, before we head out?
I think the only other thing would be that if someone also wants to correspond, especially like you said, if someone has something of a private nature and wanted to write to me, that they could they can write to me here at St. Gertrude the Great Church, and the address is 4900 Rialto Road, Westchester, Ohio 45069, and of course, our website is sgg.org that you can find about anything about that you need to know about St. Gertrude's. But you can certainly write to me via snail mail here at St. Gertrude's as well.
Right, and practice your writing skills. So, Father, that'd be a good start. Father, thanks so much, and we'll speak to you next month. Or actually, we'll have Father on for Pastoralia, but we'll be back on with Father for the Summas in 2 weeks. We can plug Father's other show just briefly here, but stay tuned for this time slot with Father in 2 weeks. But Pastoralia will return next month.
Thank you, Stephen.
And if you, our listeners, have found today's show to be informative, helpful, or in any way beneficial to you and to your faith, please consider making whatever donation is possible to our apostolate, no matter how small it may be it $1. To those of you who have donated, a heartfelt thank you for your kindness and generosity. If you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. As I've given you our places that you can email us, you can get us on Twitter, you can it's at pastoralia@truerestoration.org. And we look forward to dealing with more questions with you next time.
This program was brought to you free of charge by the sponsorship of Novus Ordo Watch. See for yourself that the Church of the Second Vatican Council is not in fact the Catholic Church of the ages. Go to novusordowatch.org.